Welcome back to Tribe Talks with ArcherPoint Retail. Today, our retail experts, Kayla Magnan and Thomas Nielsen, are discussing the methods and strategies retailers are taking to address the challenges of supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. Let's go ahead and get started. Kayla, over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. As we all can agree, and many watching this session may be still experiencing, fast-moving consumer goods and just all-around consumable retail is facing significant COVID-19 aftermath challenges. Questions like, will e-commerce continue to spike, as well as those demands for curbside and delivery options? And how does that impact the in-store locations? And how do promotions change? What about our demand algorithms? Are they recognizing these past months as historical data? How do we prepare now without over-investing in inventories? These questions have been asked since the start, and many or very similar questions have been asked during other times of business disruption. But now we're approaching the holiday season, and if retailers want to flourish in Q4, they must be acting instead of just asking. As stated in the title, retailers are adapting their supply chain and replenishment strategies. Joined with me, as mentioned, is Thomas, here to talk retail through it. We've discussed many times in about every session how retailers should digitally transform their business with unified commerce. But now I can't help but to think, how do we continue leveraging AI and these other technologies when uncertainty is the only certainty? Thomas, maybe you have some feedback for this.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Suzanne. Hi, Kayla. Hi, everyone. And a big thank you for the continued participation in these Tribe Talks. Kayla, I think in some aspect that technologies are only as good as the people behind them. But the last two questions stuck with me. And I think technologies can help tremendously, but not without the human input. Those questions you asked were, number one, does our demand algorithm recognize the past months as historical data? And the second one, how do we prepare without over-investing in inventory? These are two struggles that many retailers are trying to navigate in today's state, but also have been challenged with in the past. We have mentioned always learning from experiences, and here retailers has been taught to count on the unexpected. And with today's tips and actions to prepare your supply chain and replenishment strategies, you can be better prepared to meet unpredictable consumer demands.
And if you were in our last session, you heard a sneak peek into these supply chain considerations. And today we're going to dive further into what to consider with your suppliers. What should we deliberate on with merchandising, distribution, logistics, and fulfillment, focusing on these 5 key areas that were disrupted in supply chain and considering the impact to the rest of the business lines. So first we have here suppliers. Thomas, I believe we've mentioned some of these details in a couple Tribe Talks, like collaborative. We mentioned getting creative with your long-term relationships. Many retailers are claiming their COVID survival came from these partnerships' combined creative efforts. Other retailers reached out to new and once-used suppliers, but I'm also thinking strategic in the sense that you're looking into different industries that rely on different supply chains. For example, restaurants were partnering with other brands and becoming, let's say, pop-up grocery stores because they could receive deliveries on staples like flour, yeast, and other cooking ingredients, as well as leverage their cleaning product vendors to then be able to supply a number of items that were running low or even out of stock at the grocery store.
Exactly, Kayla. And maybe one more tip here. As you can see on this slide, we have mentioned that you should set up reoccurring meetings with your vendors, with the most important and vital suppliers, with the ones in the hotspot zones. We recommend setting up weekly or maybe even daily meetings to monitor their activities more closely, to be able to act when your plans change. But also consider reduce your shipping requirements, extend your delivery windows, or let the suppliers or vendors deliver what they can and when they can. And you're right, Kayla, retailers need to get creative with those long-term relationships. As we mentioned before, extended payment terms, other arrangements that can help ensure you receive the delivery during these critical times.
And that last point, I can also see helping provide delivery windows, but also an ability to hold more inventory of those high demand items that you need because they're selling now, just simply by reducing your item variety. And even though it is less variety, retailers were still reporting an increase in sales in those categories, as well as many retailers seeing consumers being more open to purchasing and repurchasing the store brand products.
Right, that's also a great tip, Kayla, and that leads us right up to the next area of merchandising. Here we will need to revise and rethink our purchasing plans. In our reopening session, we suggested reviewing your upcoming orders. Do you normally purchase holiday and Halloween or other specific items that we may need to consider canceling? Or do you have something on a consistent order replenishment that we should now pause due to the lack of demand and so forth?
Now, Thomas, we've mentioned how important it is to review your KPIs, even filter for new KPIs during times of disruption. So would you agree that some KPIs to review here is not only the movement of a specific product or categories, but the movement of those goods within each store or movement through the various sales channels?
Yeah, Kayla, I rarely disagree with you, so definitely here. As we have outlined on this slide here, redirect inventory to the high demand areas, and you could quickly see the high performing stores through the end of the day sales numbers. But seeing the movement of a specific product or categories, and specifically where, could help distribute the inventory you already have versus if you're going to receive or if you're going to wondering if you're going to receive that shipment and when. Within the LS Central solution, this is called store stock redistribution, which is more of a replenishment strategy. And we will briefly discuss that more towards the end. But this is redirecting the inventory you already have on hand to focus on the high demand locations and products. But keep in mind, some location may already have been closed temporarily or permanently. You could distribute the inventory based on high demand reports.
Makes sense. I've seen a lot of retailers using their closed stores as these makeshift warehouses or distribution centers. Or last year, we were heavily introduced to this, which retail now calls dark stores. So even pre-COVID, physical stores were closing and retailers were utilizing those spaces to fulfill the online demand. I even recently read about Amazon discussing buying some of those larger department stores that recently closed in the malls to use for warehouse spaces and distribution centers. Their end goal, provide more one-day and same-day delivery windows. But in regards to trends, just thinking about my local grocery stores, there's one on either end of my neighborhood. Pre-COVID, most of the time when one store was out of stock in an item, the other one had it pretty well stocked. And although it was pre-COVID, the trends generally were following the area, so I can't imagine those kinds of patterns being much different now. Of course, outside of that panic buying, because those items were just hit hard everywhere.
Right, Kayla, not a big surprise there. The identification of which channels, which product categories, and where the location are in high demand helps with inventory planning, but also helps reallocate your staff to those higher demand areas. And we will talk more about staff in our third consideration on distribution. And some questions here: did you close smaller locations but still have valuable staff to use in the warehouse or in these makeshift centers, or retain them as customer service reps working for the safety of their homes? Can you increase wages temporarily during this time of crisis, not only for the dedicated workers, but to increase the applicant count for temporary workers? There were also retailers who had used their in-store staff for delivery drivers due to the increased online order demand. While we saw some of our retailers train their corporate executive on warehouse and store level activities, that could be picking, packing, fulfillment, stock management, any activity to help with the increased background processes and to help to cover in-store shifts from increased demand, but also when employees had personal emergencies like sickness in the family or needed to quarantine for 2 weeks.
And I'm seeing a lot of these actions intertwining within the different supply chain management areas. Ultimately, that's going to impact business productivity, sales, and overall bottom line. I think it's a great time to highlight why it's so important to have plans to act on, because one action, whether internal or external, can and most likely will impact multiple areas within your organization. We've already seen retailers doing this preparation with things like backup and disaster recovery for other unpredicted disruptions, but also with some predicted events, like with what we've been preparing for recently, like holiday sales, for example. Retailers must make an effective plan to leverage through the revenue that can be pulled in Q4 and not cave in from that chaos. And the ones that do it each year successfully, the commonality is a baseline created well in advance, but with flexibility to adapt to the current trend. Retailers reflect on previous year's events and question what went right with staffing through the different sales channels within your inventory, shipments, and so on. They identify where they can improve from the last occurrence or repeat what went well. And although holidays are more of a predicted disruption, the idea goes the same for any business disruption. Crazy holiday sale, unpredicted Mother Nature weather emergency, or a number of events.
Yeah, Kayla, I think it's fair to say that we saw a common pattern through this crisis was surrounding planning. It was the retailers who planned, even they had to create a new plan for the start of the lockdown. They are somewhat what we would call doing okay during these times, or being flat or slightly above compared to last year. But I like how you highlighted these plans are as a baseline. They need to have the flexibility to be able to adapt to the current behaviors of this commotion. If we go to the next point here on logistic, our next area to focus on within your supply chain. We've mentioned the high demand item allocation, but your capacity to transport and contain that stock to fulfill that demand. What is your max capacity? Is it per store, or do we need to break it down by category or by item? Are any of your stores in location that can be a hub or hubs for either other stores or to a geographically group of high online orders?
Now, other than mentioning online orders just now, these actions seem targeted to more of the inbound logistics, but what about outbound, shipping the product to the end customer?
Yeah, so if a retailer has their own delivery trucks, drivers, meaning infrastructure, then let's have that conversation. But more common, I think, retailer use a third available or party shipment carriers such as FedEx, USPS, UPS, and DHL, just to mention some of the big ones. Using these services, there's not much control the retailer has with the process once it leaves the retailer to ship. But in this competitive space, we should be seeing the shipper's reputation become a stronger influential factor when business select a third-party carrier. We are seeing prices increase for services, but retailers and consumers will pay for what you say. You can promise second-day shipping. I will pay for that, but I better receive it in 2 days and not in 2 weeks, or I'm looking for the next carrier company. Here, though, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about returns, where we've seen many retailers during this time become more flexible around their return policy. If consumers receive items not up to their standard, please work with them within reason. A happy customer spends money, and mad one tends to leave negative comments, negative reviews. But with logistic, it's important here, inbound logistics specifically. I want to mention that the concern is more around the procurement of merchandise, the handling of the goods, and the item storage side.
So then I guess when we talk about our next point on fulfillment, it will be similar to logistics, where we're still highlighting inbound processes. And typically this would be the retailer's last step in providing the goods to their customer. But again, we're more centered around the retailer's fulfillment activities and not the act of transporting the goods to the consumer. So Thomas, do you want to talk us through here?
Yeah, sure. Some of these may seem similar, and again, it's just to highlight how connected together these areas are. But the top action we saw, Kayla, the retailers take for the online fulfillment during this pandemic was to offer free shipping on basically any order, depending on the industry and a few other factors. But any website or brand now has some promotion or offer for free shipping. Now, also enforce maximum orders. This will help distribute the inventory and provide more happy customers with less out of stock reports. But a few more points on the back end fulfillment. Make sure your routes are improved for the current situation. Some stores may be closed, but have inventory transporting to others' location or fulfilling their online orders. Some location may be overwhelmed with sales demand that inventory doesn't seem to stay on the shelves even after delivery received. Have a delivery platform to leverage the intelligence of solution that can suggest optimized routes and delivery slots. If you reallocate your staff to a delivery driver or in the fulfillment center, your processes can remain efficient with the technology powered by human knowledge.
And I think that was another theme we can identify out of this crisis. Technology is powerful, but it requires a human to provide insight that AI just can't recognize yet, which is almost a perfect transition into a topic that pairs right with supply chain: replenishment. Now, this is a store level activity, but this is what's driving your supply chain. So with our few minutes left, I think we should quickly discuss. Here we have 4 common replenishment concepts found within the Ellis Central solution. Thomas, you did mention the store stock redistribution briefly earlier, and we see that has a stock balancing benefit, since we're redistributing stock between stores to avoid the stockouts in some locations while overstocking in others. But in addition to these concepts, many of us have been hearing this new supply chain buzzword, demand sensing, which has been showing great benefits by simply incorporating daily demand analyzations into the forecasting algorithms. And while many retailers are using some of these more common replenishment strategies that I want to briefly discuss, we'll see how these concepts, along with demand sensing, should be the new approach. And since we're closing in on webinar time, Thomas, I'll just let you dive right into these topics quickly.
Thanks, Kayla. I'm happy to assist here, but I also want to highlight that we have an LS replenishment demo coming up in October, where we will go into these areas in much more depth and details. So I will do it on the high level here. First, we see assortments on the slide. This is more a ranking of your product categories and items and location, but it's very easy, simple, and fast to manage with multiple versions to alter. Next, the calculation methods is where it's actually the most common seen strategy in LS Central. This includes methods such as like-for-like, reorder point, manual estimate. There's also an average usage, which is a bit more intelligent and sophisticated than the previous methods I just mentioned, since it looks at seasonality, replenishment calendars, and so forth. The planned demand events, such as ad hoc events due to nice weather, or maybe a festival or floating event like Thanksgiving and Easter that occur every year, but on different days. Sales history and adjustment allows us to adjust for that spike, that peak you had for a specific item, and this is an unusual spike you had. And the purchase and transfer thresholds are there to help you to reduce transportation and handling costs by avoiding transfers with low quantities, and the same thing on the purchasing side, allowing you to optimize the purchasing quantities. The retail sales and purchase budgets is part of our open to buy solution, which calculates the open purchase value within a planning period to meet that targeted sales budget. And the last two here is store capacity management, is to avoid overstocking in a specific item group where you can limit on seasons in your stores down to section and even shelves. And stock coverage management is more visualization of stock coverage situation down to item group, stores and season, and down to the item level as well. The last point I want to mention here is that replenishment is an act of replacing items that's already been sold, things that retailers have done for centuries. But doing this right will increase your profit by having the right item at the right place at the right time. Automatic replenishment schemes can help predict and identify patterns, but it's with the knowledge of what has and is happening that really makes it an accurate forecast, which is where that demand sensing comes into play. This was introduced to us just a few years ago, so we are still in early adoption mode of this approach. But Kayla, it's already showing some more accurate predictions, reduction of labor and shipping costs, increased customer service, and many other benefits just from adjusting the forecast to daily happenings.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was a fantastic overview on some various replenishment strategies in Ellis Central, and I can't wait to see what we uncover in the Ellis replenishment demo. And that last point is such a great tip that helps us move right into these 3 actions to remember if you haven't yet planned in advance. So first, evaluate your channel impacts independently. How did this impact your stores? The website is much different than the impact that happened in the store. The warehouses and other storage centers. Were you selling through Amazon or maybe through other franchise stores? Then segregate that demand history that was impacted by the shutdowns and other various mandates. Those are not normalities to predict future long-term demand or be periods for comparison. And then don't forget your parameters. Review those data points. Make sure they're not seeing the fluctuations as new trends. For example, and similar to the sales history replenishment strategy you just mentioned, if we take our toilet paper flux at the beginning of the pandemic, your systems should not be thinking toilet paper sales should still be expected to what they were back in spring. And a bonus tip, incorporate the demand sensing approach with each of these tips. The technology for this method is relatively new, but we do know any business disturbance will alter the forecast. In our COVID example, just the demand for certain goods was much different in the beginning as it is now, and AI won't point out any of this behavior as that crazy COVID time unless we represent that influx. So maybe we can sum this all up and still leverage technologies in times of uncertainty by using the growing artificial intelligence solutions and previous defined algorithms that we've used to predict demand, but now combine that with the human power of right now, the human power in your business today. This will help pivot through supply chain disruptions. And as this wraps up our session on adapting your supply chain and replenishment strategies, Suzanne will take us into your questions if you have any or entered them as we're typing now. So we're going to put 2 registration links in the chat box, one for the next Tribe Talk, but also for the Ellis replenishment demo we discussed. You can also see the details on the screen, but Suzanne, do we have any questions?
We do. Our first question is, do you suggest to also start small on enhancing or re-strategizing supply chain, like taking just one area of suppliers or merchandising to the next level before tackling another?
I'll jump in here, Kayla. Actually, here is one of the areas where it's more beneficial to perform an end-to-end supply chain transformation than take it piece by piece. So no, I do not suggest starting small if you're enhancing your whole supply chain. Kayla, do you agree or disagree?
I hope I can ask a question now. I'm curious to know why it would be more beneficial. I'd always think taking a piece by piece approach is going to be more efficient.
So not only do we get questions for the participant, but also for my co-host now. In most cases, Kayla, piece by piece is usually a more efficient method. However, there's cases like here with the supply chain where the parts are so interconnected but so independently complex. It is very easy to over-engineer a single area, which can lead to a complete bottleneck in another area or many other areas, just to name one example. So I would say avoid unnecessary complexities by keeping the parts connected through the transformation.
Excellent. And thank you for your question, Kayla. Next one we have is, what technologies and software do demand sensing?
You wanna?
Yeah, I can
go
start on this one. So many people think that the approach is fairly new and the technology with it is relatively fairly new as well. But like many of our new demands from this crisis, the adoption was just very accelerated. I don't recommend a particular solution personally just yet. There are a few applications out there, but as we discussed in this session, there's many variables that go into the supply chain, but then the activities that influence or dictate that upcoming demand are going to be just as infinite. So to me, I think this is where that human play is going to come back into effect. So if you have the right technology in place, then the key with demand sensing is powering that technology with human knowledge.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, thank you both. That's all the questions we have for today. So I'd like to thank our audience and our speakers for your time today. Don't forget to register for our 2 upcoming events that are in the chat. And we look forward to catching you in October. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching this ArcherPoint video. If you found it helpful, make sure to check out our website and blog at www.archerpoint.com. Additionally, if you have any questions regarding our products, services, or information in this video, feel free to email us at info@archerpoint.com. Thanks.